Hello, and welcome to Ipsa Dixit, a podcast on legal scholarship. I'm your host, Brian L. Fry, Spears Gilbert Associate Professor of Law at the University of Kentucky College of Law. My guest is David Isle, former economics professor and now first-year law student, and we will discuss his practice of extracurricular reading as a law student, as well as his experiences as informed by his prior career. So welcome to the program, David.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Well, I was wondering if you could start by just introducing yourself to my listeners. Let's tell them a little bit about sort of who you are, what your background was before going to law school, and maybe what your experiences have been like so far.
Sure. So when I first went to undergrad, I was determined to be a classics major. And being the classics professor is one of the, I think, very few occupations that you can end up with after a full course of studies in classics. That's, I guess, what I envisioned myself as at that point, given that my baseball career had really floundered by that point. But while I was in undergrad, I shifted about halfway through my undergraduate career to economics and international relations, partly because 9/11 happened when I was right about to start my junior year of college. And it was kind of a cataclysmic event that I felt called me to some kind of more practical service than studying classics, although I still love classics, and I do think that, studying classics offers practical lessons for today, but it seemed like I wanted to get into something more immediate. So I ended up as a double major in economics and international relations. I worked for a couple of years in a consulting company after finishing undergraduate, which was not a very rewarding experience. And I then I entered a PhD program in economics. I decided that what was wrong with that experience was not so much that it was in economics, but that it was the private sector, and the goals of a private organization are much different than that of an academic economist. So I thought that was the path forward for me to find meaningful work. And so I did my PhD in economics. I studied behavioral and experimental economics. I was, I guess, risk and time preferences and information processing would be my focus, would have been my focus. So after that, I worked at George Mason University. I was an assistant professor of economics there. And after 3 or 4 years in that, I began to feel that research was not fulfilling for me, either on a personal level or as a means to have some kind of constructive role in society. We were speaking earlier about how, as a professor, often you do some research and kind of release it out into the ether and hope that somebody reads it, but I think general assumption is that nobody will. Maybe if you're lucky, the reviewers at whatever editor at whatever journal you send it to will read the paper. But especially in the field that I was in, which is kind of looking at decisions on a very basic level, it's kind of like the basic science of econ research, I would say. So it's not kind of the program policy evaluation kind of research that is most policy relevant. And also, I just had very little contact with the way that my research might have any impact on any actual person. And also, I realized kind of maybe late in my life as an economist that some people really did believe in their research, and they thought that society should actually base social decisions on what they were finding. And I guess I should have. I understood intellectually earlier that this was part of the program we were all involved in, is to better inform social decisions, and like the things that you were writing in papers were things that you should actually believe that you've found and that everybody else should know about. I never believed that to be true of my research.
It's a healthy attitude.
Yeah. Not so much. To be clear, I never, I was never advocating anything that I thought was actually untrue. Like, I was not faking data or anything like that. But I was analyzing the data in my experiments and things like that, and trying to draw logical conclusions from them, but in a way that felt almost kind of hypothetical. And that's kind of standard, I think, at least the way that economics papers are written, are that you get to kind of the policy application section at the end, and at least for the kind of research I did, which is how individuals process risk and making decisions, or how they process information, you can get very fanciful in how the biases that you're trying to identify in your paper or whatever can multiply into catastrophic social effects, and what kind of policy interventions might be able to resolve this. And there's kind of, I think, incentives in the publication process to get a little bit fanciful, to convince your audience that your research is relevant. But I realized by the end that I'd never convinced myself of that. And so also around this time, the 2016 election happened, which I think changed a lot of people's ideas about what was going on in the country, what their role could be as citizens. And I felt that the issues I was working on were not really that relevant to the country's success or failure. And also just the publication process, which I'm sure is probably similar in law as economics, is you work on something for a very long time. You get very into the minute details of it, and it spends a while. In economics, it can be years in the reviewing process, and years after you first have the idea, it gets hopefully published. So just on a day-to-day basis, I think you have very little in terms of immediate incentives to get you out of bed in the morning. And I just felt like, if I just did nothing that day, then nobody was really going to care. It was not going to impact anybody's life except for maybe mine when my tenure decision came up. So that didn't work for me just as a way to motivate myself. I'm not good at staying dedicated with that kind of incentive structure. So I felt that the criminal justice system in the United States was something I felt strongly was not working well, and something that if I got involved with, I could have an impact on the lives of individual people, and an impact that I could see more on a day-to-day basis, that there would be real people who needed my help, and that maybe after some training I could give them that help. And if I didn't go to work that day, they would miss me. So all those things were important to me, and I felt that I think different people reacted to the election in different ways. Obviously, some people used it as a call to really get involved in politics at the national level, or in electoral politics, and of course that's important. And I've got involved in smaller ways in that also, but I felt that this was more of a widespread social issue, the criminal justice issues, and something that revealed. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say a rot, but some real problems in our society. And one thing I liked about it as something to work on was that it's not really, for the most part, I think directly related to presidential politics. I think, as I said, Trump being elected made me think more about the country and how I wanted to participate in our society. But I don't see criminal justice as an issue that's really directly Trump related that much. So, yeah, that's. I guess I went on a while there, and far afield of your original question. But I hope that
not at all. So you just started law school this year, I take it.
That's correct. Yeah. So I've gotten through one semester, and next week I'm about to begin the second.
Great, and it's been going well so far.
Yeah. No, I think so. As your listeners may have gathered from my long description of my life pre-law school, I'm an older student. So I'm 37, which I think makes me the oldest student in my class. And I think there are a couple things about that. One is that I just know more stuff than my classmates, and they're all extremely smart. So it's not that I'm just smarter than them, but I've just been around for longer and had more time to learn stuff. So one of the things that really brought this home to me, and we were in, this is the second week of civil procedure class, and our professor asked a student who, the student's probably 22 years old, a question about what a justice was the point a justice was trying to make in an opinion that we were discussing. This is an opinion by Justice O'Connor. And the student began by saying, well, I think what he is trying to say in this opinion is that, and I realized that this student did not know who Sandra Day O'Connor was, and that Sandra Day O'Connor was a woman. And I guess that can happen if you're 22.
Yeah.
So some things like that, but I think also being older, and especially having gone through a stressful graduate school experience once, makes me kind of gives me a broader perspective on law school, and especially I've been through virtually a whole career, and having washed out of that entirely and gone to a second one, and I know that it's not really that big a deal if you flunk your cold call or don't do well on an exam or whatever. So I think, to me, the stakes of law school seem lower than to a lot of my classmates. So I think I'm a fair amount less stressed out than they are.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of both your economics background in relation to studying law so far, but also just, being on, both sides of the podium at different stages in your career as well, and how that's affected your sort of experience of being a student again.
Sure. I'll go for that last question first and then come back to the economics thing. I think actually going back to being a student from being a professor is not a very big transition at all, at least for me. I think if you're the kind of person that really enjoys authority and attention, and really resents being subjected to somebody else's authority and having to give them attention, then it might be a big change. But I don't think that's a big motivator for me. And I think the main determinant of my experience as a professor or a student is just being in an academic environment. And that to me feels basically the same, whether you're a professor or a student. There is in law a lot more deference given to the professor than in economics. I think that's partly because law classes are so much bigger than PhD classes in economics, but also I think just because law demands deference to authority in a way that research in economics doesn't. But I think it would have been a much more jarring change for me if I had, become an economist at a private firm or something. I think the change in environment and culture there would have jarred me much more than just the change in role, but staying within the academic environment. So that change has been fine for me. In terms of how economics, my experience in economics has influenced my study in law, I guess if you had asked me this last summer and what I expected to be the case in law school, I think I would have said that I expected a lot more hostility to economics from law, I guess. I mean, I knew that, law and economics was kind of a big movement, but my perception of lawyers was that they were kind of hostile to economic thinking. And that's definitely true of some lawyers and, some of the opinions I've read. But I guess I've been surprised at how deferential law is to economics a lot of the time. And in some ways that I think are good, in some ways that I think are maybe bad. I think, I guess I should be careful here, even though probably none of my professors from the last semester will listen to this podcast, but I'll throw blame on the opinions then that we've read instead of the professors. That there's definitely a lot of the time that I think economics is imported incorrectly, where the understanding that the judges have of the economics that they're using is not very thorough.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that this is a common criticism of a lot of kind of mobilization of economic argument, including through the law and economics movement, that there can be a certain superficiality.
Yeah, I think part of it is because, one of the things I've felt as an economist is that we don't know anything. Economics, I think is, I don't think it's because economists are stupid. I think it's because, or even that they have the wrong methods, but just it's a very difficult field to know anything in. And I don't think that that the economists who kind of speak most with the legal profession are trying to be misleading, but at the same time, there's this whole world out there of law, which both has a lot of influence on society. I mean, legal rulings have large effects, and courts are powerful, and that's tantalizing. And of course, also there's a tremendous amount of money in law. So I think if, just like I was talking earlier about, the policy application section of your academic paper, when you're kind of selling yourself to the legal profession as a discipline, it's easy to suggest, more confidence in your results than you actually have. So I just so a corollary, and to be clear, I don't think economics is anywhere near as a sham science as what I'm about to mention, but I just read a book on partly on the use of bite mark matching in criminal cases, which the book argued, I think persuasively, has been given far too much latitude by criminal courts, and it's not really a very reliable form of evidence, but because there's a market for it, there's ends up being a supply of supposed experts who are willing to testify that they've gotten a lot more information out of the evidence that they've been given than they really should testify to. So I think there's, both in life in general, because people like to be confident and it's fun to to tell people that you know what you're talking about, and in the legal context specifically, it's easy to get overconfident about stuff, and I think particularly in economics, where it really is so difficult, I think, to learn things, that there's a tendency towards overconfidence, and I think part of that too is, in policy discussions, for instance, there are a lot of important economic policy decisions to be made. And while an economist might not know that much about economics, because again, there's just not that much consensus on a lot of important issues, they know more about economics than other people. And those people sometimes are more than willing to say that they're perfectly confident in what they're saying. So I think that sort of bidding war for credibility can sometimes result in overstatement of confidence too. So I don't think it's that economists are deceitful. I think it's just that it's easy to oversell. So I think that's part of why the legal profession ends up having giving a lot of deference to economists and in kind of an oversimplified version of economics, because that's often what the economics profession is offering.
It tells very neat stories sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder, just in passing, do you think your background in economics and the sort of economics worldview that I assume to a greater or lesser degree you must have internalized affected your decision-making process about where to attend law school?
Not so much. I mean, my decision to attend law school, where to attend law school, was essentially made for me by admissions committees. So it turned out to be easy. I guess one thing is that I did not apply to Chicago, which I understand to be a hotbed of law and economics, partly because I wanted to really be sure that I was not going to get roped into doing more economic stuff. So it might have been relevant to my decision not to apply to Chicago, but really I wanted to stay on the East Coast anyway. So I probably wouldn't have applied to Chicago. So I'm at Columbia, and I think the impression of Columbia, and I think it's probably a correct one, is that a vast majority of the students, end up going to big law in New York. And I'm sure the pressures to do that will build as I continue my law school career here, but I'm hoping to stay away from it as much as possible.
Right. Well, so let's transition a little bit to one of the reasons I initially was interested to talk to you, which is your really impressive list of outside reading as a first semester law student on a really wide range of different subjects. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of what prompted that and how you think it's inflected or affected your experience of your first year of law school, if at all?
Yeah. So what prompted it, I guess, is just that I've always been a devoted reader, and going into it would have been a big change for me to stop reading when law school started. So it wasn't that I decided to have this big program in conjunction with law school of outside reading. It was more just this is a part of my life, and I didn't want to end it. I guess one thing I'll add on that subject is one obstacle to me when I was thinking about what to do instead of economics, or if I wanted to leave academia, was my conception of myself is partly as an intellectual. And I think within the academy, there's this perception that everybody outside of academia is not necessarily an idiot, but is not really thinking hard. even within economics, which is perceived as and is a discipline that thinks of decision makers in the private sector as intelligent and largely rational and making roughly good decisions. But I think there is this idea that like if you leave the academy, then your intellectual life just kind of ends. And I knew that that wasn't true because I know people who are not professors and who read widely and have interesting things to say. So I've eventually overcame this fear and was able to convince myself that I could still think about plenty of things as someone who did not hold a position at a university. But maybe continuing to read in other fields was part of my way of really asserting that to myself, that I was going to get a professional degree and my intention was to enter the profession and be a practicing lawyer, but that didn't mean that I had to give up my other intellectual interests. So that was part of the goal of that reading. And then in terms of kind of what I've read and how it complements the things I've been studying in law school, I definitely read a lot in U.S. history, and I read a fair amount in U.S. history before, but I think I kind of accelerated that following the election as well, just because as a citizen, as an American, I feel like it's important to understand my country better. And also I think it's maybe every citizen of any country thinks that their country's story is incredible and fascinating. But I definitely feel that about the United States. The country's story just has so much depth in it and resonance to me. So and of course there's a lot of interplay between U.S. history and U.S. law. So,
yeah.
Especially,
so I was wondering, maybe you could just say, and I could be totally off base, but like looking at a lot of the stuff that you've been reading, it seems as if it could, to some degree, the choices, in other words, could to some degree have been informed by ideas or subject matter that you were studying in school. And I also wonder, whether you found that the reading that you're doing is informing your experience of the classes that you've been taking.
Yeah. So definitely I read a lot on criminal justice issues as well. And part of what led me to go to law school as opposed to, say, I don't know, try to find some nonprofit to work for that works on criminal justice issues where I maybe could have used my econ degree directly in some way, is after a fair amount of reading, thinking that public defense is kind of crucial to the system functioning better, and that I wanted to play that role and kind of support the public defense system for at least a few years and understand that better before, if ever, moving on to some other role. And I definitely bring in the U.S. history reading for sure in class when I can. So I remember this is like the second week of civil procedure. And I think, I can't remember the exact decision we were talking about, but it was Hugo Black featured prominently. And I knew a fair amount about Hugo Black from several books that I've read. I guess the FDR biography I read, I think, talked about it. Anyway, so, I kind of related Hugo Black's whole background to the opinion that we were talking about. And the other students were kind of like looking at me like I had three heads. They were like,
yeah.
So sometimes I think I go overboard maybe with bringing in things that I've learned outside of class to class. And so actually the professor in that class cautioned me that on the exam, I should not use things from outside the course on the exam because I am the only one that would do that. And she would know that it was me and it would break anonymity. So, yeah, if that gives you an idea of how weird that is to compared to other students. So,
yeah.
I mean, I think I still think the perspective offered by the things I read outside of class is valuable to me. But in terms of just doing well in the classes on a purely academic level, I think it may hurt at least as often as it helps. I mean, the the professors in our classes, and maybe you do also, give the advice at the beginning of the course that we know that there are a lot of commercial guides out there, but please don't use them because they'll probably just confuse you. And we're trying to teach you our version of this class, maybe different from somebody else's version. So just stick to our version. I think that's probably good advice for basically everybody. And sometimes, whatever I get from outside reading might violate that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I imagine it depends on the professor. I'm pretty open-minded about that sort of thing, but but that may be the exception that proves the rule more than anything else. So anyway, I guess in closing, David, if you could just say a little something about like what your experience has been so far and sort of where you see yourself going forward.
Yeah. So my experience so far, like I said, it's been relatively low stress for me compared to what I expected a first year of law school to be like. I guess that's kind of famous last words. The second semester starting now, and I'm sure it'll be overwhelming soon enough. But so far, it's been mainly kind of a continuation of my academic experience, and though I thought the first year of law school would be kind of like, okay, this is my first year becoming a lawyer. I feel like that'll really happen for me once I, start working over the summer. So if anybody in your audience has a position available in a public defense office, get in touch with me. I'm looking. But my intention is to get as much experience in public defense as I can, as soon as I can. So this coming summer, I'm hoping to work in a public defense office, likewise the next summer. And then hopefully after that, I'll be working as a public defender as well. So, and I think that's going to be the break in experience for me. I mean, I grew up in, I don't think anybody in my immediate family has been in a courtroom with a criminal charge hanging over them, or ever been represented by a public defender. So I don't have that much experience with these kinds of situations. It's going to be a real expansion in my life experience to do that, and I think that part will be challenging for me, both to be have that much close experience with people facing these kinds of situations that I don't have, and also to figure out a way to kind of eventually earn their trust so that I can advocate for them. So I think that will be the real break from my previous experiences that'll force me to grow more as a person. I think the first year of law school has felt mostly like a big reading group. And I'm in a lot of reading groups. So I know what that's like. And, that has been mostly fun for me, and not very uncomfortable. So I am, looking forward to more of that the rest of the semester. And I'm sure that I'll learn plenty from that and grow from it too. But I think the real growing pains that I'll have, I think, will be this summer and following, when I'm actually working with clients.
Great. Well, good luck with it, and thanks for talking with me tonight, David.
Great. Thank you so much.
I've been to the prisons at Norfolk, Concord, Framingham, and Walpole. People in confinement day after day, no job training, no education, no rehabilitation. Let me tell you, if they didn't go in as hardened criminals, they came out that way. So when we tackled prison reform, we were really trying to stop that vicious criminal cycle. That's what the furlough program and work release are all about. And I'll tell you why I think it'll work. I also replaced the old juvenile prisons with new rehabilitation programs, and that is already working. The number of juveniles returning to crime has dropped from 83% down to 25%. And these are not our figures. They're from the Harvard Law Center for Criminal Justice.